The palace existed in the space between heartbeats, which made walking through it an exercise in existential vertigo. Queen Lyra had long since stopped noticing the way corridors bent around corners that hadn't existed a moment before, or how the morning light streamed through windows that faced inward. 20 years of living in a structure that treated causality as a polite suggestion had numbed her to the strangeness of it all. What she couldn't grow numb to was the sound of her daughters crying. It wasn't a loud crying, which somehow made it worse. Mira and Senna had learned early that screaming accomplished nothing, so they simply leaked tears in silence, their small faces crumpled with exhaustion that never found release. 5 years old, or the Etherean equivalent, which translated poorly into human chronology, and they had never slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. Lyra stood in the doorway of their chamber, watching her daughters rock themselves in their suspended beds. The beds themselves were minor miracles of quantum engineering, designed to exist in multiple states of comfort simultaneously. They had cost her 3 months of diplomatic negotiations with the Keshri Collective. They had accomplished absolutely nothing. "Perhaps," said Mora, the night attendant, with the careful tone of someone who had made this suggestion before, "we could try the harmonic suppressors again." "Their neural patterns adapted in 4 days," Lyra said. Her voice came out flat. She'd been told once that human queens could delegate, could hand their children to nurses and tutors and simply rule. The thought was laughable. She was Etherean. Her biological signature was literally woven into the palace's dimensional matrix. If she slept, sections of the palace might stop existing. If she truly relaxed, they might all end up in last Thursday. And her daughters had inherited just enough of her quantum instability to make rest impossible. "Your Majesty," Mora ventured, "you haven't slept in 3 days either." "I know how long it's been." Lyra crossed the room. It took 7 steps today, though yesterday it had been 11, and gathered Senna into her arms. The child weighed almost nothing, had always been small even by Etherean standards. Her ears, elegantly pointed and far too large for her face, drooped with misery. "Mama, I'm so tired," Senna whispered. "I know, little star. I know." Mira, slightly larger and significantly more stubborn, had stopped crying and was now glaring at the ceiling as if she could set it on fire through sheer force of will. Lyra had to admire the attempt. She'd tried similar approaches to problem-solving in her youth. The palace chimed, a sound like crystal breaking in reverse, and Lyra felt the dimensional current shift. Someone was requesting entry to the outer threshold. At this hour, that meant either an emergency or an invasion, and she was too tired to particularly care which. "Mora, watch them. I'll return shortly." "Your Majesty, protocol suggests." "Protocol can phase into next week and stay there." Lyra set Senna gently back in her bed and headed for the reception hall. Behind her, she heard Mira announce with grim determination, "I'm never sleeping. Ever. Sleeping is stupid." At least someone in the family had a plan. The reception hall reconfigured itself as she walked, expanding from an intimate receiving room into something suitable for diplomatic incidents. The throne manifested because the palace thought she might need it, which was presumptuous but not inaccurate. She didn't sit. Sitting implied she had time for whatever this was. The view screen, which existed partially in 6 dimensions and gave most visitors headaches, flickered to life. A human face appeared, weathered and anxious. "This is Captain Way of the merchant vessel Persephone's Grace. We're requesting emergency medical asylum. Our navigator is dying and we're 3 weeks from the nearest human facility. We know you have the technology. Please." Lyra studied the captain's face. Humans were still relatively new to this sector, stumbling around with their charmingly linear perception of time and their tendency to explode when exposed to dimensional rifts. They'd made contact with the Etherean realm only 15 years ago, and the relationship had been cautiously cordial. Humans found Ethereans unnerving. Ethereans found humans refreshingly predictable. "What happened to your navigator?" she asked. "Probability cascade during a jump." He tried to calculate a path through a manifold and the manifold calculated back. Lyrie winced. She'd seen that injury before. The navigator's consciousness would be spread across multiple timelines, all of them collapsing toward death. Painful. Complicated. And yes, she had the medical technology to fix it, though it would drain resources she couldn't easily spare. The palace was still recovering from the fracture, that was what they were calling it now, as if a civil war that had shattered 3 provinces and scattered her court could be reduced to something so simple. She'd lost allies, advisors, half her dimensional anchors. The palace itself had cracked, leaving entire wings sealed behind probability locks she didn't have the energy to unravel. And she was so very tired. "How many in your crew?" she asked. 12. "We won't be trouble, Your Majesty. Just need medical and maybe 20 hours to stabilize him for transport. 12 humans loose in the palace. 12 more variables in an already chaotic equation. Mira and Senna would probably find them fascinating, which meant they'd be even more impossible to settle. Dock at the outer ring, Lyrie said. Standard quarantine protocols. I'll send medical staff to retrieve your navigator. Captain Wei's relief was visible even across dimensional barriers. Thank you. We won't forget this. Lyrie ended the transmission and stood for a moment in the empty hall, listening to the palace hum around her. Somewhere above, her daughters were crying again. Somewhere in the damaged wings, sections of her realm were slowly blinking out of existence. And now she had humans to manage. She started laughing, because the alternative was screaming, and screaming would probably cause a localized temporal anomaly. Your Majesty. Mora's voice drifted down from the upper levels, concerned. I'm fine, Lyrie called back, which was such an obvious lie that even the palace seemed skeptical. A nearby wall flickered uncertainly. She headed toward the medical wing, her footsteps echoing in corridors that couldn't decide how long they wanted to be. The humans would arrive soon. She'd save their navigator, send them on their way, and return to the impossible task of ruling a broken realm while her daughters cried themselves through another sleepless night. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of problem she'd been trained to handle. Which meant absolutely nothing, because some problems didn't care about training. The palace chimed again. The humans were early. Of course they were. Finn Reeve had slept in worse places. The cargo bay of a mining hauler during a 3-month asteroid run. A maintenance closet on Luna Station while waiting for a transfer that took 6 days to process. Once, memorably, in a recycling unit after a shore leave incident he still couldn't fully explain. So the quarters the Etherians assigned him were, objectively, fantastic. The bed was comfortable. The walls were a soothing crystalline blue. The door only occasionally forgot it was a door and turned into a window, which was disconcerting but not actually a problem. The real problem was that the room kept moving. I swear this was closer to the mess hall yesterday, Finn muttered, stepping into the corridor for the 3rd time that morning. He'd left a trail of protein bar wrappers at intervals, like breadcrumbs, but they'd disappeared. Possibly eaten by the architecture. A passing Etherian, tall, elegant, with those distinctive pointed ears, gave him a look of profound pity and continued walking. Or gliding. Finn wasn't entirely sure the locals actually touched the floor. He'd been aboard the palace for 4 days now, pulling guard duty while the medical team worked on Navigator Chen. The poor bastard had been touch and go for the first 48 hours, his consciousness scattered across so many timelines that he'd been having conversations with himself at different ages. The Etherian doctors had apparently stitched him back together with something involving quantum thread and probability matrices, which sounded made up but had worked. Now they were in the waiting period while Chen stabilized, which meant the crew of the Persephone's Grace was stuck in diplomatic limbo, trying not to accidentally insult a civilization that could fold space like origami. Finn's job was simple: stand at his assigned post in the outer palace ring, look professional, don't touch anything that glowed. This would have been straightforward except his post kept relocating itself. Excuse me, he said to another passing Etherian, this one shorter with elaborate braids that seemed to defy physics. I'm looking for Junction 7 Beta. The Etherian blinked slowly. It's where it always is. Which is where? Behind you, 3 hours ago. Finn turned around. There was a wall. A very solid, very present wall. I don't think I can walk through time, ma'am. Have you tried? She glided away before he could formulate a response, leaving Finn alone in a corridor that was definitely longer than it had been a minute ago. He checked his handheld. The Etherians had given each crew member a modified translator device that supposedly helped with navigation. His showed a cheerful three-dimensional map that made absolutely no sense. According to the display, he was simultaneously on 3 different floors and slightly outside the palace entirely. Outstanding, he said to nobody. His stomach rumbled. He'd missed breakfast, which had been served in a dining area that existed only during meal times and vanished completely afterward. Captain Wei had described it as efficient. Finn had different words. He started walking, following the corridor as it curved gently upward. Or downward. Honestly, gravity here was more of a suggestion than a rule. Twice he passed the same window showing a view of stars that were definitely not the stars visible from this sector. Once he walked through what he thought was a doorway and ended up exiting from the ceiling of an empty chamber filled with floating garden beds. The plants looked judgmental. I'm lost, he announced to the plants. If you have opinions about that, now's the time. The plants said nothing, which was probably for the best. One of them did rotate slightly to track his movement, which was concerning but not currently his biggest problem. He found a staircase, finally, something that made sense, and climbed up. Or down. The steps were carved from something that looked like crystal but felt warm under his boots. Voices drifted from somewhere above, light and musical. Children's voices. Finn paused. He hadn't seen any kids since arriving. The palace seemed to be staffed entirely by adults who moved with that eerie Etherian grace and spoke in riddles. The sound of children laughing was so startlingly normal that he felt his chest tighten with something like homesickness. He continued up the stairs and emerged into what looked like a library, if libraries were designed by someone who thought books should float in spheres of soft light and shelves should rearrange themselves based on the reader's mood. 2 small figures darted between the spheres, girls, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with long pointed ears and hair that seemed to shimmer between several colors at once. They were playing some kind of game that involved catching light and throwing it at each other, giggling when it burst into sparkles. Hello, Finn said, because his training had covered a lot of scenarios, but what to do when you find alien children in an impossible library hadn't made the list. Both girls froze mid-throw. They stared at him with enormous eyes that were too old for their faces. One of them, the slightly smaller one, stepped protectively in front of the other. You're human, she said. It wasn't a question. Guilty as charged. I'm Finn. I'm with the ship that's docked here temporarily. You look weird, the larger girl announced. Your ears are wrong. Yeah, well, yours are interesting, Finn said. But they work pretty well, I bet. The smaller one tilted her head. Are you lost? Incredibly lost. I was supposed to be at Junction 7 Beta about 2 hours ago. Junction 7 Beta is boring, the larger girl said. Nobody goes there. That explains why I can't find it. I'm supposed to be standing there looking official. Why? It was a fair question. Honestly? No idea. But they gave me a uniform and a schedule, and I'm very good at following both. The girls exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. The smaller one spoke first. We could show you where it is. We're not supposed to talk to visitors, the larger one added immediately. But we're also not supposed to be in the library without Mora, the smaller one countered. So we're both breaking rules. Which means it cancels out. Finn had no idea if that logic was sound by human standards, let alone Etherian ones, but he appreciated the effort. I don't want to get you in trouble. We're already in trouble, the larger girl said matter-of-factly. We're always in trouble. Mama says we're chaos vectors. She says it with love, the smaller one added. Usually. Finn found himself grinning. These kids were all right. Well, if you're already chaos vectors, what's a little more chaos? Lead the way. They led him through passages he was certain hadn't existed before, chattering the entire time about things he couldn't quite follow. Something about their beds being stupid and sleep being impossible, and how they'd once stayed awake for 6 days straight and made a garden grow backwards. That sounds exhausting, Finn said. Everything's exhausting, the larger girl said with the weary tone of someone 3 times her age. They brought him to a junction that was, according to his useless handheld, exactly where Junction 7 Beta should be. A relief guard was already there, looking annoyed. You're 4 hours late, the guard said. I'm pretty sure I'm early, Finn argued. What time is it? Yes. The guard left, and Finn took up his post, which involved standing next to a door that led to a storage area containing supplies for the human medical equipment. His job was to make sure nobody stole the supplies. In 4 days, nobody had tried. He suspected nobody would try, because the Etherians seemed to have plenty of everything, and also the door was locked in 6 dimensions simultaneously. The 2 girls hadn't left. They were now sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching him. Don't you? The palace was screaming, which it only did when Queen Lyrie was genuinely terrified. She'd been in the throne room negotiating a trade agreement with the Keshri ambassador when Mora burst through a door that hadn't been there 3 seconds earlier, her face pale and her usual composure completely shattered. Your Majesty, the children are missing. Lyrie's blood turned to ice. The Keshri ambassador, a being composed mostly of crystallized light, dimmed sympathetically. We can reconvene, they said. Yes. Please. My apologies. Lyrie was already moving, her mind racing through possibilities. The palace was secure. The palace was always secure. Except it wasn't, not since the fracture, not since whole sections had sealed themselves off and the dimensional anchors had destabilized. Her daughters could be anywhere. Could be anywhen. When did you last see them? She demanded as Mora hurried alongside her. 2 hours ago. They were in the library. I turned my back for 30 seconds to retrieve a book and they vanished. I've searched everywhere, Your Majesty. I've checked their usual hiding places, the gardens, the observation deck. I even checked last Tuesday. Did you find them in last Tuesday? No, but I did find your missing correspondence seal, which is a separate issue. Lyrie barely heard her. She was already reaching out with her quantum sense, trying to feel for the familiar resonance of her daughter's life signatures. They should have been easy to find, their biology was half-synced with the palace's dimensional matrix. But she felt nothing. Just the usual hum of the structure around her and the faint static of the sealed wings. Assemble the guard, she said. Search parties. Every accessible level. If they've somehow gotten into the damaged sections. She couldn't finish that sentence. The damaged sections were unstable, reality bleeding in and out like a wound that wouldn't close. If Mira and Senna had wandered in there, they could be trapped in a probability loop or worse, scattered across timelines like poor navigator Chen had been. The palace shuddered around her, walls rippling with her distress. A vase fell upward and shattered against the ceiling. Someone's lunch appeared briefly, floating in mid-air, then vanished again. Your Majesty, please breathe, Mora said gently. The palace is starting to invert. Lyrie forced herself to take a breath. Then another. The walls stabilized, mostly. Right. Yes. Controlled panic. I can do that. The guards assembled quickly, spreading out through the palace in organized search patterns. Lyrie joined them, moving through corridors that stretched and compressed around her anxiety. She checked the twins' bedroom 3 times, as if they might materialize between visits. She searched the meditation chambers, the bathing pools, the kitchens where they liked to steal pastries that existed in 4 flavors simultaneously. Nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. The palace was vast, but not infinite. They should have found something by now. Some sign. Some trace. Check the outer rings, she ordered. They wouldn't have gone that far, but check anyway. A young guard whose name she couldn't remember sprinted off toward the sections where they'd housed the human visitors. Lyrie continued her search through the inner palace, opening doors to rooms she hadn't entered in months. Some of them had changed, reorganizing themselves during the fracture. One room she remembered as a studio had become a greenhouse growing plants that bloomed in reverse. Another had simply ceased having a floor, just empty space stretching down into probability. She was checking the observatory when Counselor Tave found her. He was old by Etherian standards, his ears silver-tipped and his movements careful. He'd been one of the few who'd stayed loyal during the fracture. "My queen, you need to rest. Let the guards search. They're my daughters, Tave. Which is precisely why you need to maintain stability. The palace is responding to your distress. We've had 3 temporal echoes in the last hour and one of the dining halls has started existing backwards. I don't care about the dining hall. The staff is eating dessert before soup. It's very disorienting." Despite everything, Lyrie almost laughed. "You're trying to make me feel better. Is it working?" No. But she appreciated the attempt. She forced herself to slow down, to think. Mira and Senna were clever. Stubborn. They'd survived 5 years of sleeplessness, which meant they were resilient in ways most children weren't. They wouldn't have wandered somewhere truly dangerous. Probably. "Where would I go," she murmured, "if I were 5 years old and exhausted and desperate for something different?" "Away from supervision," Tave suggested. "Obviously. But where specifically?" She closed her eyes, trying to think like her daughters instead of like a panicking mother. They'd been in the library. They'd left no note, which meant they'd gone somewhere on impulse. Somewhere Mora wouldn't immediately think to check. "The visitor quarters," she said suddenly. Tave frowned. "The humans? Why would they?" "Because humans are new. Interesting. Different. And because her daughters were curious about everything, especially things they weren't supposed to investigate. Send word to the outer rings. Tell the search parties to check near the human sections." The message went out through the palace's communication network, which functioned via quantum entanglement and occasionally delivered messages before they were sent. Lyrie headed for the outer rings herself, Mora and Tave trailing behind her. The corridors here were more stable, built to accommodate visitors who couldn't handle full-dimensional flexibility. She passed a confused-looking human carrying what appeared to be a tray of food that kept changing temperature. "Excuse me," the human said, "is this supposed to be ice cream or soup?" "Yes," Lyrie said without stopping. "That's what the last person told me." The outer rings were quieter, less populated. Most of the human crew was either in medical or in their assigned quarters, staying out of the way. Lyrie felt her quantum sense reaching out, desperate for any hint of her daughter's presence. And then, faintly, she felt it. A resonance that was achingly familiar. Close. Very close. She started running, which was undignified but necessary. Mora and Tave struggled to keep up. The resonance grew stronger, leading her down a corridor toward a junction where one of the human guards had been posted. She couldn't remember which one. Couldn't remember anything except the desperate need to find her children. She rounded the corner and stopped so abruptly that Mora crashed into her. The human guard, young, unremarkable, wearing a standard security uniform, was asleep sitting against the wall. And curled against his chest, breathing slowly and deeply in perfect synchronization, were Mira and Senna. Actually asleep. Truly, deeply asleep in a way Lyrie had never seen. Her vision blurred. She was crying, which was ridiculous, which was unprofessional, which was completely understandable because her daughters were safe and they were sleeping and she thought she might never find them. Your Majesty. Mora's voice was gentle. Should we wake them? No. The word came out fiercer than she'd intended. No. Let them sleep. Just, let them sleep. She approached slowly, carefully, afraid to disturb whatever miracle was happening. The human stirred slightly, his eyes opening. He looked confused, then alarmed, then absolutely mortified as he registered who was standing over him. Your Majesty, I can explain. How long have they been asleep? Lyrie asked. I don't, maybe 30 minutes. They just sat down and... I didn't know what to do, I couldn't leave my post, and they were just kids, and... 30 minutes. Lyrie's voice cracked. They've never slept more than 20 minutes in their entire lives. The human, Finn, she remembered suddenly, his name was Finn Reeve, stared at her. Never. Their biology doesn't allow it. We've tried everything. Medications, neural suppressors, quantum harmonics. Nothing works. She knelt down, reaching out to touch Senna's hair, afraid her daughter would wake at the contact. But Senna didn't stir, just continued breathing slowly against the human's chest. I don't understand. 3 weeks had passed since Finn's life had taken a sharp left turn into the surreal, and he still wasn't sure if he'd agreed to this or been diplomatically kidnapped. It's voluntary, Captain Wei had assured him before the Persephone's grace departed. Completely voluntary. The Queen made a formal request, not an order. A request backed by the fact that 2 children will never sleep again if I leave, Finn had pointed out. Well. Yes. But still technically voluntary. So now Finn lived in the Aetherian Palace, in quarters that had been upgraded from occasionally forgets it's a room to mostly stable luxury suite. He had a bedroom that stayed in one place, a bathroom where the shower remembered it was a shower, and a sitting area with furniture that had only rearranged itself twice in the past week. He also had a schedule, which the palace staff had presented to him with the gravity usually reserved for military orders. Sleep hours, 2200 to 0600. Non-negotiable. The twins' health depends on it. Meal times, flexible, but please inform kitchen staff in advance so food doesn't phase into breakfast while you're eating dinner. Free time, extensive, but avoid the sealed wings, the probability gardens after dark, and Counselor Tave before he's had his morning tea. Guard duty, discontinued. Your primary role is now classified as biological sleep facilitator. Finn had laughed when he'd read that. Then he'd realized they were serious. The twins had taken to the new arrangement with the adaptability of children everywhere. They'd tested boundaries immediately, of course. The first night, they'd refused to sleep at the scheduled time, declaring it stupid and unfair and tyranny. Finn had simply shrugged and said he was going to bed with or without them, and they could do what they wanted. They'd lasted 15 minutes before padding into his room and climbing onto his bed without asking permission. We're not tired, Mira had announced, even as her eyes drooped. Totally awake, Senna had agreed, already half asleep. Now it was routine. Every night at 10, the twins showed up in their sleeping clothes, which were apparently woven from something called quantum silk and cost more than Finn made in a year, and claimed their spots on either side of him. They'd talk for a few minutes about their day, about the games they'd played or the trouble they'd gotten into or the absolutely fascinating way a certain hallway had tried to eat Counselor Tave's shoe. Then they'd fall asleep, and Finn would lie awake for a while, staring at the ceiling and wondering how his life had become this strange. Tonight was following the same pattern. Mira was recounting an elaborate story about teaching a garden to grow sideways, while Senna practiced braiding Finn's hair, which had gotten longer in the past few weeks. You need a haircut, Senna observed. Probably, Finn agreed. Mama says humans have to cut their hair or it keeps growing forever and ever until you trip on it. Your mama is basically correct. Our hair stops at the right length, Mira said proudly. It knows when to quit. Your hair is smarter than mine. I accept this. Mira giggled, then yawned hugely. I'm not tired though. Sure you're not. I could stay awake all night if I wanted. Absolutely. You're terrifying. I'm scared of your wakefulness. Senna finished the braid she'd been working on and patted his head approvingly. You look silly. I contain multitudes of silliness. Within minutes, they were both asleep, Mira sprawled across his chest and Senna curled against his side. Finn adjusted slightly to make sure they were comfortable, then settled in for the night. He'd gotten used to sleeping with company. It was actually kind of nice, in a weird way. Less lonely than the empty crew quarters he'd occupied for years. The door chimed softly. The palace's way of announcing a visitor without actually making enough noise to wake sleeping children. Finn looked up to see Queen Lyrie standing in the doorway, backlit by the corridor's gentle luminescence. She'd been doing this lately. Checking in after the twins fell asleep, ostensibly to make sure everything was going well. Finn suspected it was more complicated than that, but he wasn't going to pry into the emotional state of an alien queen who could accidentally turn his room inside out if she got upset. They're asleep, he said quietly, which was obvious but seemed like the thing to say. I can see that. Lyrie stepped into the room, moving with that characteristic ethereal grace that made it look like she was floating. She'd dressed down from her usual formal attire, no crown, no elaborate robes, just a simple dress that still probably cost more than the Persephone's grace. May I? It's your palace. It's your room. But she sat anyway, in the chair near the bed, her eyes on her daughters. Her expression was soft in a way Finn had rarely seen. Usually she looked like someone carrying the weight of collapsing dimensions, which was probably accurate. They sat in silence for a while. Finn had learned that Etherians were comfortable with silence in a way humans often weren't. They didn't feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. Finally, Lyrie spoke. They're gaining weight. The kitchen staff keeps feeding me enough for 4 people. I think they're worried I'll starve. You're very efficient at redistributing it to appropriate recipients. She was almost smiling. Mira told me you taught them about breakfast for dinner. A human delicacy. Pancakes at night. Revolutionary. The kitchen staff was horrified. The kitchen staff needs to relax. Now she did smile, and it transformed her face entirely. Finn had to remind himself that she was an alien queen and he was a security guard who'd stumbled into this situation by accident. The gap between them was so vast it might as well be measured in light years. How are you settling in? She asked. Truly. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you joined your ship's crew. It's different, Finn admitted. But not bad. Your people have been kind. Confused by me, but kind. You're an anomaly. We don't get many of those. Happy to provide variety. He glanced down at the twins, who were snoring softly in perfect synchronization. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't it work before? All the technology, the treatments. You clearly have resources I can't even imagine. Why couldn't anyone fix this? Lyrie was quiet for a long moment. Because I was trying to fix them, she said finally. As if they were broken. As if their biology was a problem to solve rather than simply, what it is. I threw technology at them. Specialists. Quantum engineers. I never considered that what they needed might be something simple. Something organic. I'm not sure I count as simple. You're not Etherian. Your biology is linear, stable. You don't exist across multiple probability states. You're just, here. Completely, entirely here. And apparently that's exactly what they needed. She looked at him directly, and her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. You gave them something I couldn't. Peace. Finn didn't know what to say to that. He settled for, they're good kids. Exhausting, but good. They like you. They talk about you constantly. Finn says this, Finn taught us that, Finn makes funny faces when he's confused by the hallways. The hallways are objectively confusing. They are, Lyrie agreed. I stopped noticing years ago, but you're right. They're ridiculous. She stood, smoothing her dress. I should let you sleep. Thank you, Finn. For everything. I'm literally just sleeping. It's not exactly heroic. It's everything to me. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, and then she was gone, the door closing silently behind her. Finn lay in the dark, listening to the twins breathe, thinking about quantum biology and probability states and the strange way life took unexpected turns. He'd joined the merchant fleet to see the universe. He just hadn't expected the universe to include being a human sleep aid for alien royalty. Mira shifted in her sleep, mumbling something about gardens and sideways gravity. Senna's grip on his arm tightened slightly, as if even unconscious she was making sure he wouldn't leave. He wouldn't. Not anytime soon. Captain Wei had made it clear the Persephone's grace would return in 3 months, and Finn was welcome to rejoin the crew then if he wanted. But looking at these two small beings who'd claimed him as their personal sleeping aid, their security blanket against a biology that wouldn't let them rest, the first attempt on Finn's life came during breakfast, which seemed rude. He was in the dining hall, currently manifesting as a pleasant garden terrace overlooking stars that shouldn't have been visible in daylight, when Counselor Varen approached with what appeared to be a fruit pastry. The twins were at their lessons, which meant Finn had briefly relaxed his guard. Mistake. A gift, Varen said smoothly, offering the pastry. A traditional Etherian delicacy. We thought you should experience our full culture. Finn had been living in the palace long enough to recognize a political maneuver disguised as hospitality. That's kind of you, but I just ate. Surely you have room for. He said no, Varen. Queen Lyrie appeared from a doorway that definitely hadn't existed 30 seconds ago. Her voice was pleasant, but the temperature in the garden dropped several degrees. And that pastry contains keshri fruit, which is toxic to human biology. You knew that. Varen had the grace to look embarrassed. Or perhaps annoyed at being caught. A miscommunication, Your Majesty. I was told. You were told nothing of the sort. Leave. Now. The counselor left quickly, taking his poison pastry with him. Lyrie sat down across from Finn, her expression tight with anger. I apologize. Some members of court view your presence as a political weakness. Because I'm human. Because you're important to my daughters, which makes you important to me, which makes me vulnerable. She drummed her fingers on the table, a gesture so human that Finn almost smiled. There's a faction that believes I should focus entirely on rebuilding our military strength rather than on domestic concerns like my children's health. Your children are 5. They're also potential heirs to a dimensional realm. Everything about them is political. She looked tired suddenly, the weight of rulership visible in the set of her shoulders. I didn't want this for them. I wanted them to have normal childhoods, whatever that means for Etherians. But we don't get to choose our responsibilities. Finn thought about his own choices, about joining the merchant fleet to escape a mundane life on Earth, about accepting this bizarre position because 2 children needed him. No. But we get to choose how we handle them. Spoken like someone who isn't responsible for an entire civilization. Spoken like someone who's watched you do it for 6 weeks and thinks you're doing fine. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. You're remarkably calm about someone trying to poison you. It's not the first time someone's tried to kill me. Probably won't be the last. He leaned back in his chair. Although I'd prefer if the palace murder attempts could happen at more convenient times. Before coffee is just uncivilized. That surprised a laugh out of her, and the garden brightened immediately, flowers blooming in response to her improved mood. I'll add it to the official guidelines. Murder attempts after 10 a.m. only. I appreciate the consideration. They sat together as the palace hummed around them, and Finn realized with a start that he'd gotten comfortable here. Not just with the twins, but with this entire strange situation. The impossible architecture had become familiar. The staff who'd initially viewed him with suspicion now greeted him warmly. Even Counselor Tave had started inviting him to morning tea, which apparently meant Finn had achieved some kind of social acceptance. And Lyrie. She'd become something like a friend, in the odd moments they had between her ruling and his sleeping schedule. They'd developed an easy rapport, trading stories about their vastly different lives. She'd told him about growing up as royalty, about learning to anchor reality with her consciousness, about the loneliness of being responsible for everything. He'd told her about growing up ordinary, about the simple pleasure of sleeping in cargo holds, about how sometimes the best way to handle life was to just show up and do the next right thing. The Persephone's grace returns next week, Lyrie said quietly. Finn had been expecting this conversation. I know. Captain Wei has offered you your position back. Full benefits, promotion to senior security. They want you. That's generous. You're avoiding the question I haven't asked. Which is? Whether you're going to leave. Finn watched a flower bloom in reverse, petals folding back into a bud. Are you asking me to stay? Officially? I'm asking what you want. Officially. But her voice had gone careful, controlled. She was bracing for rejection. I want to know if Varen and his friends are going to keep trying to poison me. I've dealt with Varen. He's been reassigned to the outer provinces, which exist mostly on Tuesdays. He won't bother you again. Good. I also want to know if the twins' biology is going to stabilize eventually. If they'll outgrow needing me. Lyrie shook her head. Mora believes this is permanent. Their neural patterns have adapted to your presence. Without you, they'd eventually return to their previous state. Possibly worse, since they've experienced what proper rest feels like. So I'm essential. Yes. For how long? Years. Possibly decades. Their biology won't fully mature until they're at least 20 by human reckoning. She met his eyes. I'm asking you to give up your career, your ship, your freedom. To stay here and be what my daughters need. It's not fair. You didn't sign up for this. You deserve a choice. Finn thought about the Persephone's grace, about the crew he'd served with for 3 years. Good people. A good ship. The kind of life he'd imagined for himself when he'd left Earth. Then he thought about Mira teaching him to navigate by probability, about Senna's absolute conviction that breakfast for dinner was the height of sophistication, about falling asleep every night with 2 small beings who trusted him completely. He thought about Lyrie, about the way she smiled when her daughters were happy, about how she carried impossible weight with grace and occasional irreverent humor. I want a better title than biological sleep facilitator, he said. Lyrie blinked. That's your condition. It's embarrassing. Every time someone asks what I do, I die a little inside. What would you prefer? I don't know. Royal Sleep Consultant. Guardian of Naps. Chief Unconsciousness Officer. She was laughing now, the sound bright and genuine. How about Guardian? Just Guardian. It's a recognized position in Etherian court. It means you're formally responsible for the twins' well-being. That works. I also want reasonable poison attempt-free breakfast hours, and someone to explain how the bathrooms work because mine tried to teleport me yesterday. Done and done. Is that a yes? It's a yes. He grinned at her expression, which had shifted from controlled hope to open relief. Did you really think I'd leave? I thought you might want your life back. This is my life now. Weird hallways, temporal breakfast, and 2 kids who think I'm some kind of sleeping miracle. I've had worse jobs. You're remarkable, she said softly. I'm really not. I'm just stubborn and good at sleeping. You gave my daughters peace. You gave me hope. That's remarkable. Before Finn could respond, the twins burst into the garden at full speed, Mora trailing behind them looking harried. Finn! Finn! Counselor Tave let us help with the probability equations and we made a whole room appear. It's supposed to be there, Senna added. We didn't break anything this time. Mostly didn't break anything, Mira corrected. The room is slightly more there than it should be, Mora admitted. But fixable. The twins launched themselves at Finn, chattering about mathematics and dimensional theory in ways that made his head hurt. Lyrie watched with an expression that was warm and content and maybe something more. You're staying? Mira demanded, somehow sensing the conversation she'd interrupted.